There we go. Yeah. So Mitch has been on the podcast before. Well, actually, in the end, you've both been on the podcast before at different times. I'm going white only. Nice. This is a Noisebridge Hackerspace sticker. Oh, I finally have things to show the audience. You just have to see it backwards.
You are tuned to a live edition of Realities, the Kitchen Table Conversations. Now here's your host, Mark Fonseca Renero.
For the podcast, hello to everyone. This is Realities podcast, but more specifically, it's the Kitchen Table Conversations. My long-term, long-awaited dream that okay, I go places and I interview people all the time, but I could also have people come to my house. And let's see how that goes, of course, because not everybody can. And so it's my great fortune that I have three great people at the table today. And the big topic, the umbrella maybe, is our mediated lives, or media and our lives, all the different ways we can slice that same subject, primarily the subject that Mark Deuze is busy with. So let me say first hello to Mark. Hi.
Hey, Mark.
And full disclosure, because it brings back good memories, among other things, Mark was my thesis supervisor back in the day.
That's a while ago.
Yeah.
Cool.
When was that? That was the previous century, I think.
Yeah, well, 2003.
Oh,
okay.
Close.
Yeah, and I mean before university. Is it Indiana University?
Yeah, Indiana University.
The other one is University of Illinois. Right. So before that, you had been a professor. Well, you were sometimes in Leiden as a professor of
New Media. Yeah.
New Media. And even before that, you had done studying in South Africa.
Worked as a reporter there as well. Yeah.
And you went to Vrije Universiteit at some point.
Yeah, studying history. Yeah.
Which is exactly where Katie Stephenson works, studies, researches, doing her PhD. So hi, Katie.
Hello.
You see how I put these things together?
Yes.
Oh, wow. And then at the end of the table, returning champion, Mitch Altman, all the way from San Francisco. Hi, Mitch.
Hi, Mark.
See, I did all that. Whew. Yeah. So I'm excited because it's not often that you can have such a table. Let's get a little bit into it. I mean, Mark, you're now here at UvA, University of Amsterdam.
Right.
In the... I always get my journalism, but it's not journalism. It's
Media Studies.
Media Studies,
right,
yeah, which is separate from journalism, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I direct a graduate program in journalism, which is administratively part of Media Studies, but it's like a completely self-contained, independent unit. Yeah, tiny little unit that does cool stuff.
Yeah, and your primary interest, as I've always, even back in the day, as we say, it's been a while, has always been the job,
right?
The job of person who is, or a journalist or a media creator,
right? Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you're into the details of what is going on with that job,
right? What does it take to be a media maker these days, both professionally as well as non-professionally, and of course the dividing line between those two is, I mean, it's almost irrelevant, given the proliferation of unpaid labor and all that kind of stuff. So, so what does it? What I mean, the broad sense, what does it take, and also extending from that, assuming that everybody generally, unconsciously is a media maker these days. And so in a way, if you ask the question, what does it take to be a media maker? You're almost asking the question, what does it mean? What does it take to be alive? And to function in society, which requires you to be a media maker, for example, in the sense of producing endless amounts of data about yourself in order to, get anything in this world, whether from, going to the supermarket, getting a train ticket, or anything else for that matter, and education.
Yeah. And I mean, even in the over a decade that you've been looking at this, and a lot of us have been looking at this
absolutely
in different ways, we've seen tremendous change, a dramatic increase in the amount of media that we make, or data that we produce. That's
right.
And recorded.
Absolutely. And recorded. And
with or without our consent.
With the consent is a major issue, and then what happens? When does it get used for what?
Hello, Facebook.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Hey. Okay.
What's that?
They heard what we were talking about.
They shut us down.
You need big spots in your kitchen, Mark.
I'm working on it.
Like a whole array, like a bank.
Well, this is part of what we should. So, I create media, which is among perhaps not what the average person does. The microphones, the schedule in terms of people coming over. But what you've been looking at, Mark, is not only those who do it formally.
Right.
I mean, you're also increasingly just talking about regular people and the constant stream of putting things into a news feed.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue that the big shift, I mean, you're talking about a long-term trend. It has been in media, from media that, I mean, some people called this a while ago from lean back to lean forward media, right? That your media used to be media that you could use while literally hanging backward, on your couch or on your bed or wherever you would lean back into, and then just media would just come to you, whether it was a book or a TV, of course, that you would zap from one channel to the next. And today's media are lean forward media. I guess you could also crouch over media, because you were standing like this.
Really bad posture.
Like to look at your mobile screen, and we get all kinds of pains in our neck and tension headaches and all that kind of stuff. But the point is that when you lean forward or crouch over media, you're doing stuff. You're actually producing media while doing so, because you're entering data like commands or questions, or you open up apps, you activate certain things, and all those actions produce information, produce a narrative about you and about how you are in the world. And of course, we generally are not conscious of this. And even if we are, it's actually impossible to be completely deliberate about all of this, unless you're, of course, a highly skilled hacker type. And some people argue that we should all learn to hack, and I think yes. But as that is also unrealistic, I say what we need to learn is to hack cognitively, to think differently about our media. And so my beef, and I'll stop talking, but my beef with the way we think about media is that we think about media the way, with all due respect, communication scholars think about it. So in other words, media are these devices opposite of us and out there that have effects on us. And we can weaponize ourselves against these media and sort of, and become better. And I would say, well, the problem with that is the assumption that media are still something we live with. Right? And if you say that we live with something, we can also live without. If you're marrying with somebody, you can get a divorce. And I think with our media, the best way to conceptualize is that there is no difference. There is no boundary between us and our media. We live in media. We therefore cannot really see media anymore. We have to sort of think about them differently and negotiate them differently. And I would argue also more playfully, because I don't think we're having enough fun with them.
There's a certain way you're supposed to present yourself, and
exactly whether we like it or not, we're starting to conform more and more to the interfaces that we use, to the expectations that come with the software and hardware that we use. And rather than, and that's of course what makes hacking and sort of the maker and a movement so special. They by dismantling and putting it back together, they actively question those boundaries of what we can and cannot do, or what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to make media or and use media. And that, I think that's really interesting. That's where it gets fun. Not so much denouncing media, arguing against media, warning about effects, but more sort of like, hey, yeah, we live in media, let's take them apart. Have some fun with them. I think that's where it gets really interesting for me, also as a human being, but also as a scholar.
I think we also find ourselves in a situation where it's like, yes, encourage, and you have a unique position. Actually, in a way you all do, because you all are involved in education in some form or another. And a lot of what we do online in our mediated lives, I don't know that anyone ever taught us, right? Or there wasn't much, right? I mean, in school, for example, the internet, it was the computer in the back of the room. Maybe we'll use it if there's time. And definitely there was no teacher that could have looked deeper into how it works. So anyway, now the practices that we find on a Facebook or wherever are stuff that, I don't know, people either took what they knew from offline lives and now use it again. It's just maybe a mirror, I guess. But on the other hand, we just made these traditions, and some of them aren't very well thought out. So we just, post the dog photo, post the baby photo. I mean, we always had dog photo and baby photo at home. Well, I have none here. I'm low on both.
But now we have all these people working for corporations that are mining the information that we put online, the data, and using it not necessarily for our benefit. They're using it for the benefit of, for Facebook or Google, for selling ads. So their intent, just like TV before it, is to keep us there as long as possible, because that means we'll be exposed to more ads. They can charge more for ads or make more money from the ads. And they can also, this data can be used to try to get us to click on things. And then by seeing what we do click on, give us tweak the bots so that we are exposed to more content that make us more apt to vote for one candidate or another. It's the way I look at it, it doesn't matter what the product is, whether it's dish soap or a candidate or PR for a corporation that's somehow needing disaster control. We're all being manipulated to buy things we don't want or need. Mm-hmm. And we always were, but the power of the media gets more powerful, especially as we're interacting with it. Some things get better, but other things get more insidious as we are less able, as I think you were saying, to distinguish between life and media. Mm-hmm. And so if we're swimming in this, how do we distinguish? How do we figure out what's us, what's a bot, what's a real human, what's fake news, what's real news, what's relevant, what's worthwhile, what's making our lives better, what's making our lives worse. I think we have to be conscious of all of this and try to the best of our abilities to make use of this. As I look at it, as hacking is making use of resources and making our projects cooler. In this case, the project is our lives and society and our communities.
Am I looking in the wrong place? I mean, I like to bring up education because we're involved. Me too. But is that a place where we should be looking? I mean, you're teaching potentially future journalists, but definitely future adults.
Well, one of the most fun things I get to do is, and I had to lobby for quite a couple of years to get to do this, is to teach a freshman course. So for incoming first year students fresh out of high school, they get a course, it's university-wide. It's called Living Information. And it's basically, for in about 8 weeks, I talk about this. And I don't teach them anything. I don't tell them, this French theorist said we're all going to hell because of media, and this German theorist concurs.
That's what I do.
Yeah, exactly. And then these American corporations say, no, it's all going to be fine. And I just tell crazy stories and show them weird stuff that people have done with media, and link media with all kinds of. I have an entire lecture on zombies.
Yes,
and how cool it is that we're all becoming zombies. and so the point is to get them to think differently about the media in their life, their own media use, and to me, that's hacking in a cognitive way, right? That's exactly that, taking the resources that are there, their own smartphone, their own favorite movie characters, and then just mashing them all up and say, look, this is what you can do with it too.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I love doing that. And I think in that sense, education can play a role. What I'm a bit more, this sounds like in the Netherlands, like in many other countries, there's this whole government subsidized trend towards media wisdom. It's like a media literacy education for high schools. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And of course, and there's not exactly what you're saying. There's no high school, there's no set structure for media education in high school. And some schools do a lot with media. Other schools deny it altogether. Some people squeeze it in other classes. But there's no general approach, which is rather silly, because if there's any skill you need to survive in today's information society, it's media skills. The problem, however, the media literacy education that does exist, with some exceptions, but generally that does exist, is media education that is all about training you to be a better consumer of media. There's good sides to that, instead, like training you to see the difference between when you're being advertised to and when there's somebody telling you news. So great. It doesn't really help because people still fall for fake news. Me too. Because we all do, exactly. That's a good starting point for this conversation. But it doesn't teach students to hack media, to take media apart, to have fun with media. Media become this sort of yet another dangerous monster that you need to know which weapons to use, how to slay, which is a negative sort of, for me, a very negative. And I say this with respect to the teachers who do this, because they do a great job. But I would like to see more playfulness in this space.
And in terms of getting students to actually get something out of it, the positivity or the constructive approach may have better results. I don't know.
They can. It's also important, I think, to limit the amount of media that we personally feel is negative. Like, what would we rather do with our time right now? Spend 20 minutes clearing out all the things, get rid of the red dots on our Facebook, or going out and talking to a friend, I don't know, whatever, getting in a fight, whatever you're into. I mean, if, of course, I make a device that turns TVs off in public places. So I'm kind of into limiting certain media over others and other activities as well.
Oh, that's interesting. So specific media that you try and turn people away from, can you explain which ones you find more positive or negative and things like that?
All of them have pluses and minuses, and I haven't watched TV since 1980. So that one, for me, I'm a total TV addict. I can't do a little. And if a TV's on in a public place, I can't be doing anything human. I can only sit there and drool and stare. And even if I'm telling myself, stop doing that, what we're talking about. So that's why I turn that one off. For anything good that's on TV, and there are plenty of things, I'm doing something which, me personally, I'm doing something more interesting and enjoyable in my life. But other people are different. I don't want to make choices for anybody else, but we all have to make these choices in order to live lives that we feel are as fulfilling as can be.
I mean, a lot of what you do, Mitch, with the way I see it, in terms of with your workshops and teaching, is, I mean, people already create, right? Kids learn on their own, learn from so many different sources, but you're one more source in people's lives where they learn, well, first of all, they learn how to use tools that perhaps, like soldering or soldering.
Soldering, we're in Europe.
Soldering. And that's something that, again, there's no class that teaches you to solder, and maybe there doesn't need to be, I don't know, educators. But that's something that you teach that can empower someone, right? Now you become someone who can create the devices that you love to play with. Whereas so many of us, including, I grew up and I wanted to buy the device because then I could go do fun stuff with it and, yes, create. I always wanted a video camera when I was a kid. I couldn't tell you exactly why, but I just knew that once you gave it to me, I was going to do a lot of things with it. And I did. Thanks, Mom.
I made one. It was really terrible, but it was just with a cassette recorder, so you could barely even see what the image was supposed to be, but it was fun to try.
The video record, yeah. Did it have? Could it record data actually? Or
yeah, tapes? Poorly, but yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Very cool.
And so, coming back to Mark a little bit, in the context of a formal institution, teaching in class, I find it interesting that you mentioned, having to lobby heavily to get a school to try something. Mm-hmm. I once proposed a podcasting class in 2003 to University of Amsterdam, and it got shuffled around in some papers, and I got told to go away. So, times have changed, right? Institutions in some ways have to acknowledge that something's going on out there, right? We see like what are they called? MOOCs, right? With the Okay, you're in a context where you're trying to challenge some existing paradigms.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I won't say that the lobbying was necessary because people didn't see merit in the course. They did. And it was actually a lot of people were very excited about it. The problem, of course, with the university system is that, well, and especially here in the Netherlands, as opposed to, for example, in the US and the Midwest, where I think all three of us have had a history of going or attending or teaching at a university, is that there's little or no freedom for students. So, when you arrive at the university, you're kind of locked into a sequence of courses that lead you to sort of like a guaranteed end product. It's all very sort of, and so to put a new fundamental course in there somewhere that is sort of like a free-for-all where you don't get the proper literature that is building on what came before or provides the scaffolding for the whatever comes next, but it's sort of this standalone crazy little thing that people, yes, are excited about, but how are we going to fit this in? So I think that was the main issue, and I think so it's great that we tried it and it's working now and it's got good evaluation. So I get to do more of it. So that's great. So also credit to the institution for being that flexible. But it does say something about how institutions in general, especially in education, they might be aware of these kind of things and the need to retool and to rethink what they're doing and the way they're teaching certain things, specifically when it comes to media and information, the role of information and data in our lives, is that you need to teach that differently from from let's say psychology or sociology. But then our institutional framework doesn't really allow for that flexibility too much. And that's, I think, a general problem here, is that we have an institutional arrangement of society that works and is premised on a certain way of handling information and transmitting information, whether it's from the government to citizens or from companies to consumers or whether it's from teachers to students. And then you have a digital culture that people are growing up in and getting used to that deals with information and data very differently, much more intimately, much more intuitively, and much less deliberately. So that on the one hand has as a dark side that people are lured into ways of using media that make them, profoundly profitable data points. As Mitch talked about earlier. And the upside is that we move into a media environment where anything goes. You can find information about anything. If you care about something, there will be information out there that would really help you forward, whether it's because you have an identity crisis or you want to learn soldering.
But
right?
if you can tell what's worthwhile and what isn't, this is a big problem nowadays.
Which is a skill in itself.
It is, and that would be something definitely worth focusing people's attention on as well. One of the things with education in general is that it's always necessarily going to lag behind society. Sure. And with the education systems, with some pretty notable rare exceptions, it's all about absorbing information really passively and then parroting it back on a test, which is supposedly about the evaluation of learning. But there's no more learning. It's all about training people to take the tests because the test scores are so important to get the degree, which is important to get a job so that you can pay back your student loans in the United States anyways, so that you can be out of commission until at least your 50s when you've forgotten how to live. So this is a big problem. So that's why we really do need educators and administrators in education systems in order to try to make education relevant, which is really about, as I see it, preparing people for a lifetime of learning. And with our mediated society, all the things we've been talking about are really important for that.
Yeah,
Mark, I mean, when it comes to studying The Job, I'm curious, I mean, how have things changed? I mean, especially the last year or two, what do you find yourself focusing on? And maybe that's somewhat different from what it was back in the day.
Yeah, so, I did the first wave of studies on how, media professionals made it work in the early 2000s. And I wrote a couple of books about it, and it was all nice. And I thought I got a pretty good handle on what it takes.
Yeah.
And but I think you're quite right. The last couple of years, something has changed. One part, some things have just long-term trends have accelerated. The issue of precarity, I think, the notion that, which doesn't mean that people might not have a job or those, but it means that whatever you're doing now as a media professional, no matter whether you're good or bad at it, it has no bearing on what might happen next. And that total loss of control or sense that you don't have control over what happens next, that's precarity. And I think that's paramount now, where it used to be sort of the realm of a specific section of the labor market. It's now all sections of the labor market. And it goes hand in hand with, for media professionals, a proliferation of skills and tasks that they're now individually responsible for. Yeah. To give you an example, I used to work and live in the US. When I arrived back in the Netherlands a couple of years ago, I made a round along big national news media to sort of introduce myself and say, hey, what are you guys up to? Because I'm now running a journalism program. What do our students need to know? And I distinctly remember being in the office of one of the editors-in-chief of one of the main national newspapers, quality newspapers in the Netherlands. I won't name names, but it's one of two, right? and I asked him this question, and I said, so what is the biggest challenge for you right now? And this was 2-3 years ago. And he made this sort of epic gesture around him. This arm waved around him, sort of pointing towards the newsroom behind him through, of course, transparent glass, because, of open office spaces and that kind of nightmare. And he said, this is the problem. And I said, what do you mean? I said, what I need to do is transform these people that come in, file their stories, and go home. I need to change that into people who become 24-hour entrepreneurs of the news. Meaning, when they have an idea of the story, they go out and put it on their Twitter feed and ask for responses. Then they start doing their research. The moment they have little updates, they post it throughout the day. Then they have their first news story, goes online. Then they do a longer story, do a little video. And then the next day we'll have a long form sort of reportage. Then they, over time, build up expertise. Then they take that expertise into the country. They start giving lectures and talks, participate in panels, and continuously market themselves and, of course, the newspaper or the news organ, and on a 24-hour basis.
Not asking much.
No, and so now, which on the one hand,
people passionate about what they're doing. It's not just a 9-to-5 job.
Exactly. And this is the conundrum, right? Because part of me thinks that's awesome, right? I mean, how cool is it that your work doesn't stop when you filed the story, but that you can keep on developing it? The dark side of all of this is, of course, that 80% of all that work will not be paid.
Right.
Of course, most people who do this don't have contracts, right? And it requires a constantly learning, upskilling, reskilling, for which you are individually responsible. So that's one trend, one acceleration of that trend. And the second thing, and that's where my current research is now focused on, is media professionals that say, to some extent, fuck it, I'm going to do it my own way. Mm-hmm. So people starting their, whether you call this startup culture, which has a Silicon Valley twang, which I don't necessarily, but people starting their own, editorial collectives, media workshops, sort of independent studios. And you see that whether it's in games, in advertising, you see it in journalism now more and more. And so what me and a colleague of mine, Tamara Witske from the University of Groningen, have been doing the last couple of years. You know Tamara very well, of course. Yes.
She's not on Facebook, is she? Anyway.
No, she's not on Facebook.
Podcast, though.
Yeah, exactly. But for the last couple of years, we and our students have been going and visiting startups in over 20 countries around. Over 11 countries around the world. We've been to Colombia, we've been to Ethiopia, we've been to Italy, to Australia, to Denmark, to all over the place, US, Canada, and talk to startups, not the high profile ones, but sort of smaller, and sort of like, so what kind of journalism is being produced here? How do people who are completely outside of this mainstream media system, how do they think, what they think is journalism and what is good journalism? Because all of them, whether it's in Tanzania or in Colombia or in Italy or the Netherlands, when you ask them, so why do you do this? Because it's risky. I mean, nobody's making any money. Yeah. And why do you do this? Because here is where I get to do the journalism that I find really matters. Right on. And I can't do that at this newspaper, this television station anymore. So there's this profound idealism there. But and our assumption is that because of the increasing precarity in media work, but more and more media professionals doing things on their own independently as freelancers or whatnot, that the definition of what, for example, journalism is, or what filmmaking is, or what game development is changing. Yeah. Because those definitions grew out of a relatively stable organization of the media industry, right? Where what journalism was determined in the newsroom, where advertising was determined by big advertising agencies. And I think now what advertising is determined by these loosely affiliated networks of independent professionals, the same with journalism. What is the conversation there? What's happening? And so that I think that's really a fascinating trend and development. So we're working on a book about this right now.
Huh. Oh, great.
Yeah. I'm especially fascinated with, as I get older, how age impacts a lot of this. And I say this because the stuff that I was willing to do, accept, that was of interest to me, has of course changed,
right?
As I'm sure it has for all of us. And again, that enthusiasm, that energy that so drove me to do anything and everything, I'm now much more, wait a minute, I'm a little more cautious and even a little bitter. In that, I love to, for example, make podcasts, but the value of podcasts is so, what's the word? Anemic comes to mind, but maybe that's not correct. It comes and goes, right? To one organization, it's worth so much. To another organization, why would we want that?
Sure.
This is if I'm making podcasts for others or with cooperation of others anyway, which is essential in many cases for me to afford to survive. And there comes how much do you need to survive? I find as I get older, the number's a little higher than it was when I was 22. So I'm especially curious, and there'll be time for it, I suppose, as the studies come forward, with not only, yes, the country and the context, but also like changes over someone's lifetime.
Well, one thing, briefly, of course. Because, I mean, a long-standing argument among people who study how the media industry is evolving and what that means for the job, right, has been that all industries are increasingly mimicking what is called the Hollywood model of production, meaning which is an industry which is profoundly precarious, that where to get in is incredibly easy. To get an entry-level sort of position and somewhere in a Hollywood studio, for example, or in any film or television studio around the world, is relatively easy. Yeah. But the industry chews you up and spits you out generally within 1 to 3 years. And it's very difficult to find in Hollywood people over the age of 35. And you see that happening elsewhere. Like one thing that really struck me coming back to the Netherlands and looking at the profession of journalism, the Dutch journalist was among the oldest journalists in the world. The average age of journalists in the Netherlands 7 years ago was 45 of the entire professional group of journalists. If you walk into the newsroom of any of the mainstream news organizations in the Netherlands now, there's hardly anybody over the age of 30. There's a couple of, with all due respect, dinosaurs. Yeah. Then there's a big group of nothing, because those were all people on temporary contracts that have been booted out and replaced by junior staffers, interns, and all those kind of people, and young freelancers. And then there's that group, people between the age of 24, 28. All of them are from my program. Yes. Yeah. And sort of like, it's like, meat for the grinder. And you're exactly right. I actually, just before I came here, I had a conversation with one of our main teachers in our program who was teaching audiovisual journalism. And we were sort of like, reflecting on how the program was evolving and what we're doing, and we're innovating and we're doing this, we're doing hacking now, and we're doing sort of transmedia storytelling, very cool, very hip. And we were talking and he's still in touch with a lot of his friends from the industry. And at some point he said, like, you know what, the industry, it's so cool right now, all the stuff that's possible with new media, new storytelling, it's really happening, it's really cool. But I will tell you, I would not get in the industry now, knowing, because what these young kids have to accept in terms of, how their career and contracts and labor and working conditions are organized, I couldn't deal with it. And I think that's a reality where, and I think that's also a part of the reason why people strike out on their own. It's like, at least let me make my own future. Let me make my own way of organizing my life.
At the very least. Yeah.
At the very least.
Yeah.
Well, mainstream media, I don't know about elsewhere in the world so much, but in the United States, the budget for actually paying journalists just plummets continually.
Yeah, same.
And so so there aren't jobs available. So people have to, if it's journalism or whatever it is, find what it is, make time and explore and find things that they're passionate about, and somehow get what they need doing what they're doing, at least in part, so they can keep doing these things that they're really passionate about, things that give meaning to their life.
Right.
And but the thing is, things are changing very quickly in general, not just for media, which is a big thing, but for everything. We have to find creative ways to make what we need, to have the resources we need to live the lives we want to live. And this is certainly true, and it's been happening with music and other art forms since digital copies can just be made so easily. Musicians really don't, except for the big players, make money on their music. They have to find creative ways of selling other things because we do, I think, unfortunately, need money to live the lives we want to live in our current world. But journalism is certainly part of all of this. We cannot have democracies without journalism. Right. It's not possible. We need journalism in order for people to have the information they need to be an informed electorate. And without that, we get the leaders that we're seeing pop up, especially in my country. So what are we going to do about that? We need people idealistic, and like these people that you've been interviewing that are passionate about doing their thing, they're doing it regardless of money, but they're hoping to find some way to be supported in doing it. And, way back when, journalism was supported by basically like artists, patrons, essentially, rich people who felt that it was important. Of course, they had their own agendas. Journalism's always biased, but it's good if your bias is right out front, and then people can choose for themselves. Yeah. So can we come back to more of that kind of thing, at least in part? I don't know. We have to explore various different ways of making journalism not only relevant, but able to support the people who do it.
Yeah, the one thing that speaks to this is that you see, actually not so much with journalists, if you talk about journalists who started their own companies or editorial collectives, but more so with journalists, with the majority of journalists who work in a freelance or part-time or otherwise precarious way, which is the majority of journalists today. That they increasingly cross-subsidize their work, which means that they again, this is the Hollywood model of production, where they do what they have to in order to do what they want to. So in Hollywood, that means that everybody who serves you coffee does auditions at night, right? Or writes a script. And you see this in journalism as well. And journalists that will do, they will curate some exhibition, that will do the annual reports for some bank or some public foundation. Yeah. And then in the weekend and during sort of hours in between does research for an investigative report that he or she will hopefully sell to one or two media outlets. Yeah. And that model is now sort of commonplace. Right. And it wasn't even 5 years ago. Right. So that's how quickly this is now going. And the question is, what consequence will that have for example, the quality, but also the credibility of journalists? When a journalist will, in the future, will have to say, next to their story, like, I did this reporting for the story, these are my sources, and this is where, these are the organizations that also pay me. Procter & Gamble pays me during the day, but I did this at night, or something like that. Yeah. It's going to be, and so I think ethics, it was interesting, like last year they did a study among 15,000 alumni from big media and journalism programs in the US. And they asked them, like, a lot of questions. One question was, what is the number one skill that you now need in your work? Mm-hmm. And now, what would we think? We would think maybe hacking or, data journalism or something like that.
Editing,
No.
Editing.
More than editing, yeah. Over 80% said ethics.
Ethics.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. They need to get a handle on the challenges they're facing, the multiple requirements on the job, the combination of sources of income. How do you deal with public officials who basically take a dump on you every time they speak, right? Which is now commonplace among politicians and any kind of, but they still, and they act as if they don't need you anymore, but they do. And you kind of want to be independent of them, but you can't. How do you do that? That's an ethical conundrum, and it's a skill. It's not just an abstract academic conversation that we're having. It's a skill, on-the-fly ethical decision-making. And that goes back to what we started our conversation with. I think that also relates to how we use media in everyday life. How do you use media ethically? Right? How do you know when to switch the damn device off? And then realizing that you cannot actually switch it off, but at least you can ignore it for a while, even though it doesn't ignore you. And to me, beyond the ethics come the aesthetics, which is, again, the having fun. How can you use media to make something beautiful rather than ugly?
Or not be driven crazy, but in fact be inspired,
happy. Become happy.
People seem to be driving themselves into some kind of misery.
The recent.
I mean, news has always been, what's the most fear mongering, and it sells ads, right? Yeah. So, if you sit at home, especially since I happened to get home after 14 months of travel on January 20th. So Americans know what that means. That was the head of the beginning of the new regime. Yeah. So, and so people are just glued to their TVs and radios and internets and whatever, looking at things that are making them full of despair. This is not making their lives better. So, again, these kind of choices are really important to make. And it's kind of hard not to fall into that when everyone else is doing it. But there are other aspects of life.
Yes. Well, that's the thing, right? How to liberate or teach people how to liberate themselves in terms of being stuck on these things. Yeah, and
making use of the media for our advantage, but not getting sucked in for, just the profit of whatever other corporations.
I think Henry Rollins said it, one of my personal heroes. I always throw in Henry Rollins whenever I can.
He never said anything. Go ahead.
No, I think in one of his, he used to have this TV show where he did this monologues, and in one of them he said, how do we make media not a crutch, but a tool? And I think that's a really great sort of metaphor, something you just props you up, or something that you can use to make stuff with and to do stuff with. I think that's a really great, go Henry.
Yeah.
But
All right. Well, a couple of things. One, it's already time in terms of. So I want to make sure to bring things to some kind of a close. Funny, as we're speaking, a somewhat promotion from a dear friend of ours. Good thing Ufa is making a MOOC on communication ethics. Says
awesome.
That's my boyfriend.
Oh, okay. Self-promotion, but a worthwhile one.
Works on this MOOC. So I do research on work and meaning in work. And as a young person, the precarity that I think I walk into and a lot of my friends and colleagues are walking into is actually very terrifying in a sense. Right. And when I went to university for the first time, it was at Indiana University, and I wanted to study journalism. And every single day, my father would put at my seat at the table an article from a journalist, how little money they would make, or how stressful it is to go into this work. Needless to say, even though IU has a great journalism program, I did not attend any classes on journalism. And so, as we say, more and more journalists are freelancers. How can they make value? I mean, I look at Mark, and he invests so much time into these podcasts, and how can you make it so that you can, live? What if you could live solely off of making podcasts? And I know people are successful at it, but in doing it on your own, how is that possible? So these are things I'm pondering, and I don't know the answer. So I'm excited to read your book in a year or two, you said? Or is that how long the research is going to take?
According to the publisher, the book is coming out early next year.
Okay.
Oh, awesome.
So it should be almost done. I haven't written a single word.
Publishers live in a different paradigm than the creator of the.
No, but I mean, the research is done. So I mean, but it's maybe it should become a book also with some tips and tricks, and rather than just some academic But yeah, this experience of work and what work means. I mean, I would like to hear more about your work, because that is, I think, so fundamental to all of this. And then, in a way, life has become work too in the context of media. Jesus, I mean, what you have to do on a day-to-day basis to keep up with both the hardware,
yes,
and then the software, and then all the content that you kind of like,
or alleged content,
what you have to keep up with. I mean,
the hardware, as well, I mean, there are ways, like, everything is getting simpler, right? Tools are becoming simpler.
It's a good thing computers are time-saving devices. We spend so much time on them.
Yeah, But even that simplification has a cost, and to me, financially, it has a cost. You know, I could simplify this table. I don't think it's coming through on the camera. If I could invest $1,000, you know,
right.
I could have less stuff and more, machines that do it better.
So what Mark is saying is, right now you have a one-time opportunity to invest $10 into a table. I think that's what some journalists are doing too. Yes.
Yeah. No, I've always had that option, and actually, in different times, people have come forward and helped me in that sense. And I'm actually a big believer, but that's a cultural question as well, and it's not just limited to any particular part of the world, but the culture of online support. In other words, I've said this before, I'll say it for probably the rest of my life, I've always gotten so much support from Germany. I'm being very specific here. And that support comes in the form of, tweets and written advice. If something's wrong with my website, maybe you should fix this, Mark, here, I did it for you. But also financial. The donations from students, from people with not a lot of income, but who for some reason, and these people also exist in the United States, but they're more scattered, who believe that, I like this thing, this source, if I can be a source, I don't know, I'm going to therefore give something of my income. And a lot of services are trying to figure out how to tap into that, like how to get people to, enable people to support that which they find important to continue existing. But I find that in our world, because of the way the internet kind of was a sort of Wild West, if that's a good comparison, with a lot of smallpox blankets and bandits.
And massive government oversight.
So because it was this kind of place, there is no one tradition. And not even, it's just hard to predict if in the future people who love content and create maybe even content will also feel like they should be involved, supported specifically.
Right.
We do okay with this sharing stuff for whatever it's worth, right? We'll retweet things forever. But if you've ever created something that really had some important message, something really useful, and you just see it get retweeted or shared and shared, what we now know is that doesn't mean that it's actually been read, listened to. All it means is that we've successfully inspired people to do what I would call the minimum, which is a click. Not that clicks aren't of value, but that value is so far, I think, overestimated in some ways. And then what I'm really excited or hopeful about is that in the future we'll have the kids who grew up not just on the internet, that we've got, but kids who grew up with some kind of education, some kind of I want to say guide, but I don't even know if it's that. But to the point where when they grow up, they recognize their I almost said civic duty, but their place within the internet as I don't know.
Well, I'm not very hopeful of that, but I'm certainly encouraging of it. We grew up with media totally surrounding us, right? So TV was a huge part of all of our lives.
Yes.
Me in particular, growing up, trying to avoid life and putting it all into TV. But still, we all grew up with media, and there were all these opportunities for media literacy in our lives. And most people choose not to really explore that. It gets more complicated now, which makes it more difficult. So I'm not sure what kind of social context can be created in order to make that enjoyable, because that's what's necessary. If we make it enjoyable, not only way worthwhile, but enjoyable, then people do it. Right. Yeah. So, turning TV on is just something just everybody would do. And I made it fun to turn them off. And so some teeny percentage would actually, first thing they do when they come into the room is turn it off, which I think is wonderful. But how do we do something, along those lines for media in general and how we choose to use it? I don't have an answer, but I think we all have to really explore that. And that makes our lives better and the lives of those around us better.
Well said. Well, I want to say thanks. I'll provide some relevant links to a lot of the stuff we've talked about. But Katie, thanks for being here. Mark, thank you so much. I'll put a link, among other things, to your Twitter at Mark Deuze. I'll spell it out Deuze. And it'll be written.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. And Mitch, you'll be around in Europe for the coming month?
Yeah, I leave on October 9th from Amsterdam, but I'll be I'm giving a workshop in Tech Inc. Hackerspace tomorrow, and then in Arnhem, talk on Friday, and then workshop on Saturday. Hack 42 is the hackerspace there. Then I'll go to Make Munich and give workshops there, and also a talk.
So if you're in the Netherlands or Germany in the next few weeks, you get a chance to participate and learn to solder, among other things.
Sure, and everyone's welcome. It's really fun.
All right, thanks so much, guys, for being here. And to the Facebook audience, we'll see you again next time. Realitiespodcast.com is where things happen. And bye.
You've been listening to a live edition of Realities Podcast. Like the show or leave a comment on Facebook, Realities Podcast, or follow us on Twitter at RealitiesCast. Subscribe to Realities Podcast in your favorite podcast app and get new shows automatically.